Hello and welcome again to our continuing series on Hinduism. And today we're diving into the four paths, the four margas, the four yogas that constitute the core of Hindu practice. And we thought about yoga in a general sense in the last video, the art and science of integration. And today we're getting into the details of how that general practice gets subdivided into these four lanes. Now, why are there four lanes or four different paths within the larger project of yoga? Well, the answer is because in the Hindu understanding, there are four personality types or four fundamental kinds of people: intellectually oriented people, active people, devotional people, and experimental people. Intellectual, active, devotional, experimental. Just to distill it down to one word each. And those temperaments, you might say, those propensities are not all the same. And the yoga suggestions are going to be different and tailored to each one of those different kinds of people. So that's the general rationale as to why there are four paths or margas. So let's dive in. So the first one is called Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, the path of understanding. And this isn't for everyone. In fact, in the literature, it's often claimed that this is the smallest path, the steepest path, but also the shortest path. And it is, again, designed for people who approach life largely through the intellect, through rational discourse. So here's the general project. What if we could pierce the veil of Maya with the sword of intellectual discernment, with rational discourse, with logic, with the study of texts, with discoursing around the concepts that arise in the study of those texts? What if that's the flame that's going to burn away the fog of Maya the most effectively? In fact, this class, this study of Hinduism, it has been largely one giant exercise of Jnana Yoga. Because we use words, we use concepts, we use discourse to investigate what Hinduism or whatever religion we're studying is really all about. And so, as students and learners, we're very familiar with this general project of studying stuff to try to figure it out. And so, the understanding in Jnana Yoga is that it begins an intellectual inquiry, but eventually leads to deeper embodiment and transformational realization, which is where all the yogas are going, right? All the yogas go to the same place. Don't lose sight of that. As Ramakrishna, the great Hindu saint of the 19th century, said, many paths to the summit. All the yogas go to exactly the same place. But there are different roads because there are different vehicles, and we are the vehicles in the analogy. So one other thing to think about with Jnana Yoga is that its connection to the Upanishads. And as you may recall, we described the Vedas, the earlier Vedas, as largely devotional texts by priests, for priests. A lot of talk about the gods and what they like and how to worship them and what kind of songs to sing to them and how to do this ritual and that ritual. But by the time we got to the later Vedas called the Upanishads, we see in those texts really the recorded dialogues between teachers and students, discourse, philosophical investigation, questions, answers. That's how the Upanishads unfold. And so the Vedanta teaching that we've been deriving from our study of the Upanishads, with its emphasis on non-duality, all is one, Tatvamasi, thou art that. That's been the thrust of Vedanta, and essentially also that is the thrust of Jnana Yoga. to put an even more technical term on it, Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta. Advaita means non-dual. So the core insight of Jnana Yoga is going to be realizing oneness. That's why Jnana yogis, again, the word yogi is someone who does yoga. Jnana yogis aren't that interested in the gods. They're not that interested in devotion and worship. In fact, Shankara, one of the great philosophers of the Jnana Yoga school of thought, describes in his own writings his evolution from a bhakti yogi, a devotional yogi, to a jnana yogi. And he began to realize that all the gods and goddesses, as wonderful as they are all just a part of Maya. They're part of the field of concepts and perceptions that we ultimately must transcend and move through to get to that field beyond all thoughts, beyond all concepts, certainly beyond perception, where oneness is truly realized. So that's how the jnana yogi practice unfolds, along those kinds of lines. Let's get to the second marga, or path, karma yoga. Now, you recognize the word karma right away. We thought about that a lot the other day in terms of the law of cause and effect. But here we simply mean it literally, action. So karma yoga simply means action yoga, the path of action. And here the project is, what if I could turn the work that I'm already doing in my everyday life, the work that I do at my job, doing the dishes in the kitchen after dinner, taking care of the house, all of the work that we do in support of each other. What if I could turn all of that action into spiritual practice? What if I began to transform all the work that I do, not into work that I perform to serve myself, not into work that is self-interested, but work that is performed in the consciousness of service. Connect this to the idea of dharma, performing one's dharma. Life as duty, life as sacred duty, where I am performing actions not to get an outcome, a paycheck or praise or status in the community, something like that. But I'm performing the work solely as a selfless act of love. And I don't need anything in return. Think about doing the dishes. Let's just pick a dumb domestic example. There are two ways to do the dishes. One, in the consciousness of resentment, I hate doing the dishes. Yeah, this is gross. Or it's not my turn. It was their turn to do the dishes. Why do I always have to do the dishes? A lot of victim narrative going on inside there, keeping score of, I did dishes the last 3 times and she hasn't done dishes once this week. Or doing the dishes because you want everyone to notice how awesome you are for doing the dishes. A lot of ego, a lot of attachment to a result, to an outcome. That's one way of doing the dishes. Here's another way of doing the dishes. As an act of love. Steeped deeply in the consciousness of gratitude that one even has food to eat. Dirty dishes means you ate. A lot of people are going hungry. Dirty dishes means you have a home that has a kitchen, that has a sink, that is running hot and cold water. A lot of people on earth do not have drinkable, running hot and cold water piped magically into their house. The fact that you have dishes to do is a great blessing. And to do those dishes then not in the consciousness of resentment or scorekeeping, but just in the consciousness of dharma, to realize that I have been supported, so it is my moral joy to participate in the support of others and to take disorder and turn it into order, because admit it, it feels really good when the home you live in is neat and clean and everything's in its place, because everything has a place. And when it goes back into that place, everything kind of clicks into place. And there's a certain sense of some of the stress kind of leaves you. So to do dishes in that way as a healer Dirty dishes in the sink is like a wound, and you just want to heal it. And so you're not doing it to get praise either. In fact, you hope no one even knows it's you. Like, who did the dishes? You're like, I don't know. Jesus calls this, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That idea is rich in the Gospels of Jesus too. The idea of agape, which is the Greek word Jesus uses for love. And it means working for the good of the other without any expectations of anything in return. Yeah. So selfless service, that's what karma yoga is. Work performed this way without ego frees us from the wheel of samsara. And work performed for ego and for attachment to outcomes attaches us to the wheel of samsara. So karma yoga is, like all the other yogas, a set of practices designed to free us from the wheel of samsara, so that we will get closer and closer to the ultimate realization of Brahman-atman. The one word that we've been using in our study of Hinduism too is renunciation, right? Letting go. And karma yoga is another example of renunciation, letting go of the need to be rewarded, letting go of the need to be paid back. That saying from Confucius again, the inferior person asks, what's in it for me? Why should I do the dishes? What do I get out of it? That's a kind of lower consciousness, Confucius argues. The more evolved conscious person would say, what is the right thing to do? You notice how the words I, me, and mine are not even in that sentence. There's no I to be served. There's just the decision of how can I make things better. That's karma yoga. The third marga or path is Bhakti yoga, and Bhakti means worship or devotion. So this is the path of devotion. Look, any Christians listening, Muslims, and in many cases, this is a deeply held idea in Judaism too. This idea of worship as something that binds us to God. And in many ways, Christianity is one giant shining path of Bhakti yoga, devotion. So the idea that, look, love is a really fundamental, foundational, primal human emotion or experience. Why not use it in our spiritual practice, since we're already kind of built that way, yeah? So worship, love, and devotion toward deities. And in Hinduism, it's going to be deities. For Christians, it's going to be the one God, or for many Christians, the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, etc. But in Hinduism, many, many gods and goddesses. Look, let's just get right down to it here. When you drop to your knees in prayer to God, to your God, that's a different person than the person who's out running around in the world trying to get what they need. There's this saying that prayer does not change God. Prayer changes us. That we are transformed in the broken openness of devotion. When as a Christian, we turn our heart and our mind truly over to Jesus, over to God, over to the saints. Or when in Islam, we truly humble ourselves and prostrate on the floor before Allah. And when in Judaism, we come into the synagogue and we sing portions of the Torah in Hebrew, and we pray the ancient prayers of the Psalms together, something shifts inside of us. Now, again, this isn't for everybody, right? Jnana yogis are not going to be here. They're not going to feel this. But for many people, in fact, it's usually described this way, that Bhakti yoga is the biggest path of all the four, the most populous path. And you can already see why with the connections we're making to Christianity and Islam and Judaism. Many human beings take quite well to this. Again, atheists, not going to be interested. But for many, many people, this is a really powerful path. to that place where the ego begins to dissolve and at least recede, right? Because when you're praying and turning your life over to a higher power, you know that your ego is not in charge anymore. And that is a good place to be in the larger Vedanta picture, right? To come out of self-seeking and self-centeredness and come into the realization of the Brahman-atman that I am. And so, one last thing to notice about Bhakti Yoga, we've already hinted at it, but let's say it explicitly. Notice that in Jnana Yoga, our first one, the emphasis was on non-dualism. And here in Bhakti Yoga, the emphasis is on dualism. Because you can't worship a deity unless there's you and the deity. So Bhakti Yoga implies duality, at least on the surface. And that is an interesting thing to notice, that Hinduism is so big, so broad, that it makes room for these two fundamentally opposing metaphysical portraits, non-duality and duality, to both exist comfortably together. And you know why? Because it's understood in Hinduism that Brahman-atman is beyond all concepts anyway. So if you want to conceptualize the universe as dualistic, us and God, fine. If you want to conceptualize the universe as non-dualistic, that all is one, fine. Because whatever Brahman-atman is beyond all concepts, beyond all ideologies. That's why there's room for both dualism and non-dualism. And the Hindus are like, hey man, just pick the one that works best for you and do that. Isn't that nice? There's a fundamental freedom in the Hindu world to honor yourself, the way Brahman-atman manifested itself as you, the temperament that you bring into the world. Work with that. That's going to be the best path. Find the yoga that fits best with who you are, with how you apprehend the world, how you process challenges and problems. That's going to be the best one. Finally, let's get to Raja Yoga. Raja means royal. So there's some sort of naked elitism going on here. That Raja Yoga is, I think of it this way, that there's athletes and then there's Olympic athletes, right? The top of their field. And Raja Yoga, I think, is a kind of specialized yoga for people who are going to really commit. For those who want to experiment on themselves, right? Remember the 4 personality types, the experimental type, this is the path for them. And I think the fullest and most influential expression of Raja Yoga comes from a teacher called Patanjali. Patanjali lived in about 200 BCE. And he didn't invent this, but because yoga's been around for thousands of years by then. But he published a series of texts that we call the Yoga Sutras today. And they really kind of established and codified the practices of yoga that we're about to talk about. And they're also known later as Ashtanga Yoga, which means 8-limbed, like a tree with 8 big branches coming out of it. So the 8 branches, Ashtanga Yoga. What are those 8 branches? Well, this is a schema or a system that Patanjali codified or wrote down and suggested that for optimal success in this Raja Yoga path, you ought to follow these 8 stages. So the first one's called Yama, and it means, get your ethical life together. Stop being a jerk. Stop living so selfishly. Practice compassion. Practice non-harm, ahimsa or non-violence. Practice kindness. Become an empathetic, compassionate, selfless person. That's Yama. The second limb is Niyama. This is about taking on more self-discipline, taking on good habits, developing a regular practice of devotion, of service, of exercise, of cleanliness, of cleaning up your environment. So these are the two preliminary stages, yama and niyama. The third and fourth stages, asana and pranayama, that's what you do in your yoga class. So 3 is asana, those are the poses. This is about strengthening and limbering up the body. And 4 is pranayama, this is the breath control. I had a yoga teacher put it to me this way once, and she was trying to help me breathe more intentionally, more consciously, because most of us just kind of, we breathe real shallow up here in the upper chest. She was trying to get me to breathe down here from my diaphragm, like opera singers and athletes do. And she was also trying to develop a regular pattern of breathing. And she said something I'll never forget. She says, don't breathe. Allow yourself to be breathed. I was like, oh yeah. Because breathing is kind of it's like something is breathing me. It's an automatic function. So anyway, isn't it interesting that a teacher called Vivekananda, about 100 years ago, extracted 3 and 4 on Ashtanga Yoga, asana and pranayama, the poses and body work, extracted that, brought it to America, and began teaching what today you and I just call yoga class. But as we see as we're discussing Ashtanga Yoga, the breath and body work are part of a larger integrated field of transformation that begins in ethical, moral transformation, discipline, good habits. Then come the poses and the breath control. And then number 5, pratyahara, sensory withdrawal. So when I teach meditation, I often invite people to close their eyes. It's just a sort of simple way to pull back from the sensory world. That's number 5, pratyahara. Number 6 is dharana, which is concentration, leaving distraction behind. Some teachers use mantras, a phrase that you just repeat. In Zen Buddhism, they suggest sometimes that you count to 10 and then count to 10 again and count to 10 again, timed with each breath. So sometimes we focus on a visualization. There are various techniques to assist us in our dharana, or concentration, number 6. Number 7 is Jnana, and this is actually seated meditation. These all go together. And Jnana is the art and science and practice of meditation where we sit quietly. We've retreated a little bit from the sensory world. We've focused our concentration and tried to slip free from the monkey mind, the obsessive thinking, what Eckhart Tolle calls the thought stream. And in dhyana, number 7, we sink down into the stillness within, and we experience for ourselves that great, boundless, content-free awareness that is within us. And then we get to number 8, samadhi. Samadhi means together with the Lord, or in a word, oneness. This is the realization of oneness. It's described as a blissful state. It's also what happens in samadhi is there is no more subject-object duality. I am not experiencing samadhi. There is simply samadhi, and I disappear. There is not the experiencer and the experience. There is just the experience. That's what oneness has to mean, doesn't it? That there is no more I having the experience. So Ashtanga Yoga, which is a more refined way to talk about Raja Yoga, is a rather, I guess I would say, arduous or at least disciplined, intentional path of cleaning up one's life, getting attuned, and preparing the mind-body for these deeper states of integration and realization. So there you have it, the 4 margas, or the 4 yogas. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge using study to realize our oneness. Karma Yoga, the path of action, turning all of the work that I'm already doing into spiritual practice so that I constantly practice renunciation and letting go of attachments to outcomes and thereby realize oneness. Bhakti Yoga, using the heart, for heart-centered people to deepen into worship and devotion in order to accomplish the same thing as all the other yogas, coming out of ego attachments and into the oneness. And finally, number 4, Raja Yoga, the path of meditation that we're also calling today Ashtanga Yoga, to put a finer point on it. So the question then becomes, which of these 4 yogas would be the best fit for you? If you happened, just a thought experiment, if you had been born into this tradition, taking a look at yourself, examining yourself and how you process life, are you more of that intellectual person, that active person, that devotional person, or that experimental person? Or is there a sense in which at different times of our life we kind of emphasize one more than the other? Don't think of these as high-walled chutes that once you pick one, you're stuck for life and you can never do the others. We see lots of examples throughout Hinduism of people primarily practicing one, but also bringing in activities from the others. So let's not keep them rigidly separate. And yet there is still a sense that one of them is going to be the best fit for you predominantly. So that's a fun thing to think about as we close off this particular study of the 4 margas. Upcoming, we talked about Bhakti today, so we need to talk about gods. We haven't done enough of that. What about all these Hindu gods and goddesses? Let's tackle that in the next video. So I'll see you on the other side.